couple of those, or?
Yes, just a couple.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Thanks.
All right, so we're at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 1 p.m. EST. Depending on where you are, it's probably a different time. So let's go ahead and start. So welcome, everyone. Good morning, good evening, depending on when you even listen to this recording, or if you're here live in person, depending on where you are. Welcome to the US OSS Partner Community Call for May. As you know, I'm Sarah Van Hambren, and I lead your community for this fiscal year. A couple of disclaimers. Remember, this call is being recorded. We will make the recording available on the Yammer group afterwards, or you can also access it through the Event Builder registration page. Second disclaimer, I have been sick. I'm not going to lie, the past 2 days has been the worst, but I'm a lot better now. But if you hear me sneezing, coughing, or sniffling, just remember, I'm just sick. Nothing else going on. Sarah's okay. But yeah, so you've seen this slide, you're familiar with it, you're probably sick of it already, but gotta put it out here. Remember, stay informed. These are all the resources that are available to you as a US partner. Remember, we do have the other solution area communities as well, and they have their own Yammer groups, so make sure you're leveraging opportunities and content that's provided in those as well. And they do have their own community calls every month as well, so just keep those in mind. And for your lovely OSS community that you love so much, remember we have the blog posts and the calls. Remember to check the blog posts every month so that way you know what we're going to talk about during the call. And if you are ready to get started on your OSS practice, then reach out to us in the Yammer group. Or if you just want to chat, make sure you reach out to us in the Yammer group. We're available 24/7. And if you want to get involved or just know about open source at Microsoft overall, these are some great resources. Again, this deck is going to be available to you, and it always is. But if you have any questions, let me know. One thing I do recommend and I want to highlight here is for you to sign up for the Open Source Friday meetups. Those are with the Global Black Belt, and it's just an amazing set of resources for you to leverage and learn from the best. So with that being said, the last thing I got for you before we actually get started is to remind you to join us in Microsoft Inspire in Vegas. The date is coming up, and if you want to sign up and register, do it before June 1st. That's when the prices are going up. You want to save that money. I know you do. I will want to. So now let's get started. With us today, we're going to talk about Azure Sphere, and we have a couple of the experts on that area to answer your questions and just give you a brief overview and do a Q&A. With that being said, we can just go ahead and start. So Scott, Gordon, feel free to introduce yourselves and take it away.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks so much. And, thanks to the community for asking about Azure Sphere. And, definitely we're very interested and excited to present this to you and kind of show you a little bit about what we're doing. Myself, Scott Gettinger, I'm within our IoT organization. Basically, our job is to support device partners, really OEM-type device partners. And those device partners basically looking at Microsoft technologies for those devices, but also connecting those devices to the cloud. So really we focus on the device partners and the connectivity to Azure and specifically around Azure IoT, because that's really our specialty area. But that's what we're focused on, and I'm an account executive and support a bunch of different of our device partners. And joining me today is Gordon. Gordon, do you want to jump in here?
Thanks, Scott. Yep, Gordon Blackwell. I'm also under the same organization as Scott. I'm a cloud solution architect. My whole mission in life is simply to get solutions, IoT solutions, from your ideas into the market as fast as possible and scale them as much as possible. So I take somewhat more of a technical slant on the topic.
Great. Thanks so much, Gordon. And let's see, Gordon, are you going to present today? Is that right? Okay, super. Okay. So we'll get that loaded up here. But if you look at Azure Sphere, while that's loading up, let us know, I guess, Sarah, let us know when you can see that.
I'm sorry, I thought it was shared. Let me try one more time.
It was. We did lose it. I'll let you know when it's up again.
Great. Thanks so much. we'll get that shared. But yeah, Azure Sphere, if you saw, this was introduced at the security conference, I guess it was last month in April. And we've been working on this technology actually coming out of Microsoft research. And that's been, worked on really for, 4 or 5 years, but taking just a lot of experience, a lot of Microsoft experience kind of into practice here, and really working on something for a, kind of a microcontroller space. And let's see,
Still having difficulties. I am sharing, tried the desktop, and try it one more time.
No worries, it happens.
Only when you're live.
That's so true.
But let me, I'll go ahead and start. So the first few slides are really setup slides, and there's not a lot of detail on them, but let me start talking through those, and we'll have Gordon catch up here. First of all, like I mentioned, this is really based for microcontrollers. So it's a little bit different space than Microsoft's classic space, which is typically CPUs and above in terms of operating systems, whether you're building PC type devices or servers, things like that. This is in the microcontroller, so very much very embedded space for us. Low cost, single chip computers, and I'm sure you all are very familiar with those and probably use those in a lot of your applications. And one of the key things about that, and the reasons that we really focus on this, is because if you look at the research, there's 9 billion of these devices really deployed every year. So it's a huge number. And Gordon, I think we're starting to see the deck now, so appreciate that.
Yeah, we do. Great.
Yep.
Great. If you want to advance a couple slides, then we'll stop on the 9 billion one. There you go. Thank you. So I think if you look at that, in these devices, typically toys, appliances, and of course equipment, that bottom statement is kind of interesting. Fewer than 1% are connected today, so that's still almost 100 million, which is a big number. But if you think about where we're at today and what we're focused on in terms of Internet of Things and how so many people are focused on that, and that being a big part of the future of many businesses in terms of the digital transformation, that number is going to grow, and that number is going to grow a lot. And in terms of that percentage, and of course those connected devices, and a lot of the folks that are building these, the manufacturers, the ODMs, the OEMs, the system integrators that are putting these together, security may not be the first thing you think about. And so that's really a lot of the rationale behind Microsoft in terms of why we're investing in this space. And part of that, if you jump to the next slide there, Gordon, is really about that experience. Connected devices, we really can make those and provide a much better experience. And this is your classic, one of our target areas, and I think you've seen maybe Sub-Zero in some of the press releases or announcements, but one of the companies, early companies we're working with, in the appliances. And of course, if we can basically, predict the maintenance needs of whether it's a refrigerator or some appliance in the home, that can be a much better experience. We can understand when that compressor might start to fail and either replace that or suggest maybe you need to replace the whole device. But that we can provide a much better experience at the end of the day. And so that's really a lot of what this is. It's both in the consumer space because of just the sheer numbers and again, those devices are just starting to get connected. But you can also do it, of course, in the commercial space too. And if you go to the next slide, this is just some of the interesting rationale behind this. This was a October 2016 botnet attack. You may have read about this, but basically it was exploited a lot of well-understood weaknesses. It's not that people didn't understand these, whether these are weak common passwords. Really no early detection of a breach, and of course no remote update capability to really go in and fix these. And this attack is about 100,000 devices, which is a big number, but a lot smaller than what it could have been. because you can easily get 10, 100, 1,000 times that in terms of the future. So it could have been a lot worse. And, on this one, just kind of showing the liability to the company, if you will, because on the first day, New York Times, they reported that in the technology sector. The next day, it was in the political section of the papers. So then you can get government scrutiny and politicians involved. And, you can imagine, just the stress, anxiety, pressure that DYN had. This was, DYN was the company on this DDoS attack. But you can imagine, the pressures and just some of the liabilities they had. So this is where we really think we can come in and help and make sure that we keep companies, organizations really out of the press. And if you jump to the next slide there, Gordon. The reality is Microsoft, we've been in the security battle for decades, and I'm sure you're all very much aware of this in terms of working through this, whether it's at the OS or server level, but we have a lot of experience, but even have a lot of experience in consumer devices. And this goes back to our Xbox, and if you look at the Xbox, today, the Xbox that's currently shipping has not been hacked and is very secure. But if you look at previous versions, that wasn't necessarily the case. And we learned a lot through the first version that I think it took maybe 7 days before we had it hacked. The next version is 7 weeks. Third version, I think 7 months now. We actually have learned a lot in terms of what is really needed to really lock down a device, and all the way from Silicon OS on up to the cloud. And if you jump to the next slide, this is when we really get into giving you a sense here where yes, we are focused on silicon. There's actually IP that we've developed that we need to work on and basically put into the silicon. So we need to work with the silicon providers. But there's an operating system, basically, that special operating system that we've also fine-tuned just to make sure that we don't have security breaches on that. And, of course, a secure cloud. And here we're leveraging Azure. You could actually use different clouds as well. But really, those three major components are needed. And if you look at those components, I think if you jump to the next slide, we really talk about, kind of our learning. And this is really requiring, 7 different properties, and we really pay attention to those. And Gordon, I'll pass it over to you for the next few if you want to talk to those.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, when we first start talking about this, one of the things that you need immediately is to know that your device is your device. And that's where we have the hardware-based root of trust. This is an unforgeable, it's immutable key that's generated, and it's actually within the silicon itself. It cannot be changed, but we now know that your device is your device. If we look down, I'm going to kind of breach over to the certificate-based authentication. We are not using passwords. I mean, one of the problems with the botnet attack was that the default password was password. There is no password here. It's a cryptographic key, so the information is not even being transmitted back and forth, but rather validated that it is who it says it is. Defense in depth. We have various mechanisms in place, countermeasures, so that if one area is attacked, it cannot reach the next area. A small trusted computing base. Most MCUs have the hardware, and then right on top of the hardware is your code, your firmware. It has direct access to the hardware itself. We have that where the OS is a very small trusted computing base. There's a couple layers above that before you can reach your actual firmware. We have dynamic compartments, and this is hardware and software firewalls, that if one section were to be breached, other sections would not go down as well. Talked about certificate base, failure reporting. We actually capture, if there are failures, we can capture that and we can start detecting that there may be a threat or some kind of attempt to compromise the system. And then finally, renewable security. Part of this is an ongoing service to patch your kernel. We also provide the ability for manufacturers to distribute their firmware. And then, of course, the reporting back to the system. Spoke a bit about this, the hardware root of trust. Again, it's a cryptographic key. It's inside the silicon. It cannot be changed, and it allows us to determine that this device is this device. And one other piece that was mentioned that we learned with the Xbox, if by some chance a device were to be attacked, we can actually take that offline because we know that device is that device, and that's part of this. Dynamic compartments, again, I almost think of ships where they have compartments where if one section of the ship is breached, other compartments are not necessarily going to be harmed. We take the same approach with our sphere. Renewable security, we're providing ongoing capability to patch your OS, the kernel that is a custom Linux kernel that we've developed, and that if there are vulnerabilities that evolve, we can patch that. There are, with that last botnet attack, I anticipate there's actually some firmware out there that has not even been updated to this date. We can do that within hours.
Thanks, Gordon, for that. Yeah, I think if you look at it, so Azure Sphere, in terms of the offering, really what we believe we're providing here is of course, security that you talked about. And you look at the bottom of that, really the offer is for 10-year lifetime. And this is something that Microsoft is taking on in terms of, updating that, firmware as needed, as appropriate for any security issues. Productivity, I think we'll talk a little bit more about this, but we believe we have an environment, Visual Studio based that's, highly productive in terms of letting folks like yourselves really develop systems and focus on your value add and having us take care of a lot of the integration of this device and capability into your overall system. And of course, opportunity. Giving you more time and to work on line of business type experiences and solutions. So we're taking care of that aspect of it. And I want to just talk a little bit about the opportunity. Go ahead to the next slide, Gordon. We're actually right now, as Gordon mentioned, part of this is there's silicon is an aspect of this, and we do have a development kit available today. That people can start to use and test out a proof of concept. That's MediaTek is kind of first one out of the gate here. We've been working with them for quite some time, but you can see all the other silicon providers up here. We know there's folks that have a relationship with specific silicon providers and understand that really well, and that's fine. We're working with all of them. But in terms of what we have today, and that's kind of the near-term opportunity, is MediaTek. There is, one qualification on that. It is, Wi-Fi enabled in terms of how we can update that. So that is, solutions today that we can actually engage and work with you on need to have that capability in order for us to connect to that device. But we are, very interested and happy. Sarah knows how to get in touch with myself and Gordon. If you do believe you have a near-term application and that it makes sense to work with you on a device, we've got a qualification sheet and happy to walk through that with you and talk about that and talk about your opportunity there and see if it makes sense kind of on this what we call wave one in terms of the silicon we have out, but there'll be many more waves with the other silicon providers as we go down the path here in the coming months and quarters. I think
before you go on, so regarding this slide specifically, we have a question on whether we have created the same level of features and commands across all these platforms.
Great question. So we have done that with MediaTek, and there's one silicon chip out there right now. The other ones, that's all in work. And so that's not, we don't have anything to announce specifically, but we are showing you all the other silicon providers we're working with. And these will be coming out. However, as you all know, that it takes a while for us to, the IP that we're providing that for no cost to the silicon providers in terms of that. If you look at the business proposition, we'll jump to this in a few more slides, but basically it's a one-time fee, and that gives you 10 years of service, on the device. That includes the device and the service, and that's just up front, so it's a non-recurring engineering expense. And so so this is all in development, but the only one that we have really out of the chute today is MediaTek. The other ones, it's probably a number of months. If you have a near-term application and it's Wi-Fi capable, then we can engage with you on that. If you don't have it, those are a couple of the critical elements right now in terms of qualification things, then it's going to be a number of months or quarters down the road before we'll have that available.
And then just to clarify, so but is the goal for the features and commands to eventually be consistent across these platforms, or will that depend upon the provider?
No, you're correct. The goal is to be consistent across all those providers. That's correct.
All right. Thank you, Scott.
You bet. So yeah, I think the next slide there, we go into a little bit more detail in terms of the architecture. And go ahead, Gordon, if you want to jump in here.
Sure. At the lowest level, we have our hardware. That's in black. Just above that, we have a security monitor. This is basically a hypervisor, similar to what you would see on a virtual machine, but this is monitoring the actual hardware. It's actually detecting for any unusual behavior to report. Then on top of that, we have the actual kernel. Now, this is a custom purpose-built Linux kernel that we have developed, and we have open source so that the manufacturers can further extend the kernel to meet requirements by their hardware. Layer 3 is the cloud services, and this is really about connectivity. It's communicating with Azure services and capturing updates to apply as a patch for the kernel, also capturing firmware updates to be applied on layer 4. It's also reporting and provides all the security information between the cloud and the device. And then we have layer 4, and you'll see that we actually have two approaches or ways that you can place your application on this. This is your firmware. It can be placed on the POSIX, which is more of a microprocessor approach, or as on the Cortex-M, which is more of an RTOS approach. These are in containers. They're distributed in the container. There's certain APIs that you can leverage, but you can't necessarily directly connect to or control the hardware of the device. And this is a slightly different approach that explains that how the updates and communication between the device and the cloud occur. Starting with the far left, the app and the updates are through Azure services. The failures then reported up to Azure services. You can use Azure services, our general cloud services, as a support in the cloud for your device, but you're not bound to that. You can use your own private data center. You can use AWS. You can use Google or IBM. We do have the SDKs in place so that it makes it very seamless to use Azure, but we are not tying you down and forcing that to occur. We also increase productivity significantly, and this excites me. I have more of a coding background, and the ability to code this microcontroller is very similar to how you would normally work with a microprocessor. With Visual Studio, there's an extension that's installed with it, and the way that you deploy your code is by simply hitting F5. It's running the code. It will sideload it via USB cable to the device. You can actually debug the code on the device, which means that while it's running on the device, you can see the variables and you can change the variables. And that rapid development to basically stop it, make changes, and redeploy in a matter of minutes is a phenomenal approach to this. I am going to take a second and see, well, we'll come back to this at the end. I'd like to share my desktop and actually give you an example of that. Right now I'm just sharing the slides, so we will come back to that hopefully at the end. And Scott, would you like to take over this?
Sure. Yeah, I think if you like we kind of mentioned, this is open to any MCU manufacturer. You can see the list that we showed previously, the different companies that we're working with right now today, and MediaTek being the first one that we engaged with early on, and it's free. Microsoft is licensing that IP for free, so that's not something that they are paying for. It's really an opportunity for the end user. Open any cloud, Gordon mentioned that, connect up with Azure or any other cloud service you might have. And of course, innovation as well in terms of that Linux kernel being GPL'd, in the OSS community. So that's something that you can extend and leverage there. So very much open in terms of the approach here and what we're trying to provide, so it can get a large use and be as ecosystem friendly as we can make it. And I think, so this is kind of our last slide, at least in the speaking portion of this, and then Gordon's going to take over and show you a little bit of the code and the dev kit and kind of where we're at today. But, if you look at it, certified MCU, this is what we provide, and the security service, and that is basically, like we said, 10 years of life, and 10 years of device updates. And the cost of that is, if the MTK device is less than $9 for that, so that's the value prop there, so less than $1 a year over that 10-year life in terms of, the value proposition there in terms of the offer that Microsoft provides. So that kind of gives you a sense overall of what Azure Sphere is. Of course, there's a lot of levels below this, but that's really what we wanted to do to provide with you today to give you a little bit more sense of what Azure Sphere is about, what all it includes in terms of kind of the three different elements, silicon, OS, and cloud, and the different properties coming out of Microsoft research that basically we're using and leveraging in this security system and either other systems that we deploy. So happy to take questions, but I think as those come in, Sarah, also Gordon's going to show you a little bit more of the device kit that we have, and some of the development that he's been doing.
All right, so then while he's setting up, let me just tackle some of the questions that popped up. And yes, we can see your screen if that was what you were going to ask.
I was, and I think I just clicked it off again. Okay, hang on.
So one of the questions we had is, do you have an estimate on what that low cost is? Specifically, they made reference to the prior Intel chips that were between 50 to 400, and regarding that, also they're mentioning how Intel did have like Intel Joule specifically, like there was low cost, and they abandoned that space since they couldn't compete with Arduino and Raspberry Pis. Is there anything in there that you can comment on, like the actual price, or if we have that concern as well?
Yeah, so the price it is, and I don't have, the offer really is less than $9 for the whole, that includes the silicon, that includes the service. That's really what you get from Microsoft. So that is the offering price of kind of the first one out there, and the objective is really to keep that below $10. So hopefully that clarifies that question.
Oh, it definitely does. And then is it possible to share who the Azure Advisor lead for this is, which I'm not familiar about that.
I'm not sure advisor lead. The Microsoft research, actually, if you look up Galen Hunt, is really the researcher on this, and he's I'm sure you can find some presentations on YouTube. He's done some things at Microsoft's IoT in Action. I think been on that speaker circuit here the last, we had a number of those across the world over the past 6 to 9 months, and we'll continue that. But that's kind of the lead person for Microsoft on Azure Sphere, and the one that we work with, and really has done a lot of this research over many, many years.
Great. And lastly is, As you have more vendors become available, will there be some sort of reference guide to help us select the vendor per workloads? More so like if it's a thing about power, for example, like this requires more power versus maybe this one's specific for security softwares, etc.
I think that's a great idea. We have this out there today, and of course we can get you some more information on the MediaTek silicon. But I think that's a great idea and good input. We'll definitely take that back to our program manager that we work with that's driving this in terms of having a guide like that as soon as we have other silicon that's close to coming out. So great idea.
Yeah, and then we got one more. Is the team thinking about 5G?
Good question. I mean, obviously, cellular is one connectivity that we could look at, and that's definitely being considered. I think you saw folks like Qualcomm on there that we are working with. So, yes, we would look at cellular networks in terms of one ability to upgrade that device, and so that's definitely something being considered and on the roadmap.
Great. That's all we got for now.
And unfortunately, we're being challenged by the sharing of the desktop.
No.
So I think that concludes our presentation.
Yeah, it happens. Well, then, in that case, thank you guys so much. If we have any other follow-up questions, I'll be reaching out. But at the moment, we have tackled everything people had concerns with. I will be sharing the recording and the deck as well on the community call. Gordon, is there any way you can share that deck with me?
Yes, I will get that deck to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And with that said, we are going to have to reschedule our second speaker because she had a last-minute emergency, and we'll do that for next week. And so we're ready to call it a wrap. Thank you guys for joining. Thank you so much, Gordon. Thank you so much, Scott. You guys were amazing.
Thank you.
And if anybody has any other follow-ups, I'll be reaching out.
Great. Thanks so much, Sarah, and thanks to all. Appreciate it.
All right, bye. Bye, guys. Have a good weekend.